A Fall in Time, Week 5, 12th to the 18th of October 2010. Hello. Somehow we are at week 5 of this adventure already. Still, that's not even halfway, so plenty more to share yet. If you need to catch up with the adventure, do head to the introductory piece, and here's the 5th week of A Fall in Time. Along with A Fall in Time, I also shared dispatches on the intersection of fiction, nature, and place writing, and empowerment through ancestral skills. If this is of interest and you see value in my work, I would love you to subscribe. Introduction. Changes. 5 weeks in the woods. By any measure, this is a long time to stay out amongst nature, but to me at the time it felt perfectly normal and, dare I say it, natural. Before I left the city, I had thought I would begin to miss certain aspects of the less wild world, but that had not materialized. Instead, I only wished more of my friends and family, and even total strangers, could experience the changes which went along with life in the woods. These changes are twofold. Firstly, the changes we experience in the day-to-day nature, the march of the seasons, the sudden chill in the shadows, and the bellow of the deer. Then, there are the changes to the self, to how we begin to notice more, inhaling the world around us, drawing it in until it is enfolded, embraced as a part of a new whole. This particular week, the weather was noticeably more autumnal. Sharp and heavy hailstorms lashed my shelter, and the temperature began to inch its way downward. The deer were in full rut, the sound at times tremendous, waking me. They did not seem to care about my presence. There were far more important things to be doing. Below is a bad video of that soundtrack of my nights and parts of my days, filmed on a Canon SX20IS camera. It is not the best quality, especially by today's standards, but it might give you an idea of the clashing of antler and roaring of stag, not to mention the changing colours of the oak woods. Taken at dawn on the 16th of October, 2010. I shall weave images throughout this piece, mostly taken from that day, the 16th of October, when I snapped a lot of images, and concentrated on thatching my shelter on the others. Brief notes, distant music. I snapped no photos on either the 12th of October 2010 or the following day. I was busy with the shelter and did not need to move far after replenishing my water bags and bottles on the laborious walk back from the train, adding to the ridiculous weight. My journal entry for this day is correspondingly small, yet it serves to document the day. Just a small note or a single photo will often jog my memory. I am so glad I did keep those journals, each page is a treasure chest. Here follows the entry for this day. I'm falling behind with my journal entries. The simple reason is twofold. I've been rather busy just doing stuff, and I've more or less moved into my shelter, apart from sleeping. This means I have yet to find a routine or even a place to write. I will write more soon enough, have no fear. As an aside, I am never sure who exactly I am talking to when I write a journal entry. Is it me, years down the line? Yes. Or others, probably after I am gone? Yes, you are reading this now, although I'm still here. Perhaps others will read the original journals too. I'm definitely not one of those people who demand their journals and notebooks be burnt once they are gone. That feels akin to sacrilege to me. I then went on to list some brief mentions, the things I shared yesterday, such as a train conductor letting me off the 3P, the tracks in the soft earth, the fox, and my total exhaustion after carrying all my supplies back to my woodland home and hanging them safely away from hungry rodents. The journal entry for the 12th ends with this list. Today, small creature near me when sawing supports for a bench. Shrew? Bench. Clearing floor. Packing base of walls. Rigging up poncho door. Hearing music, thinking it was close by, but it was actually a small creel boat far out on the loch. Cold, cold night. Roar and roar alike. This evening there was a stag just down the hill from where I am. I had a go at roaring at him, and he answered. Journal 1, 13th of October 2010. The 13th was the day I decided to move into my shelter to sleep, rigging my tarp up inside above the area where I planned to put my bed. With that, I was totally weatherproof, centrally heated, and could cook on the fire, even if the shelter itself was not yet finished. It already felt cozy, and I suspected would only grow more so as the temperature dropped. I initially placed my hammock on the ground to use the inbuilt midge and mosquito net around my sleeping bag to deter spiders, slugs, beetles, and other creatures from sharing my warmth. For the first nights, this was not as comfortable as it could have been, but once I had done some more ground leveling where I slept, it became much better, and I had a much more ideal and elegant, comfortable solution to come. All of my day was taken up by thatching the shelter. It required prodigious quantities of heather, although if there is one thing Scotland is not short of, it is heather. This had to be laboriously pulled up by hand, piled, then carried back to camp in my now rather scratched and battered poncho I also used as a door. I would dump a load and return until I was exhausted. Then I would use all I had collected to thatch, before repeating the whole process again and again. I had been surprised that the stag had roared back at me, as my red deer roar is pretty rubbish. When I went out for a look, he ran off at full tilt, those sinewy legs carrying him quickly above a slope I would have laboured up only with considerable effort. As a recompense for not getting a photo, I found an old deer skull instead. I placed this outside the shelter by the doorway, on top of one of the 2 giant rocks to either side. I now had a name for my new home, One Skull Shack. Of mice, skulls, and parasites. There's a little wood mouse in the southwest corner near my head. I've seen him already this morning. He seems to know no fear. I may feed him peanut butter and take some photos. Journal 1, 14th of October 2010. This entry was recorded before I discovered that the mouse had chewed holes in the new dry bags I had bought as part of my resupply a couple of days earlier. Those bags had been bought to replace the others that mice had chewed at an earlier camp, and despite being suspended on paracord, they were clearly too close to the horizontal shelter beams, a luxurious walkway for a mouse. I learnt from this experience and ensured the paracord length was much longer, and fortunately, I lost little food this time. These mistakes are irritating, but they also serve to remind me I am but a small part of a vast overall picture. The wren that flew in as I prepared breakfast was another reminder of this. Troglodytes, she was at home in my artificial cave. She alighted on the bench beside me, about 10 centimeters from my hand. Tiny dark eye fixed on mine for a moment. Then off she went to catch another spider from the heather thatching above our heads. Both mouse and wren were good for keeping down the number of insect residents, and both were to stay close during my own sojourn in the shelter. Nothing in nature is wasted, and despite what others may tell you, it is neither cruel nor kind. It just is. The old skull I had found the previous day had been nibbled by rodents and was missing part of the front of the head, perhaps pecked or chewed away to get at the contents within. Everything out on those hills and in the woods had something else to eat it. Whether predator or parasite, nothing was spared. My own mortal enemy was the tick, and I was constantly on my guard against these tiny but very persistent creatures. The midges, the bane of the first few weeks, were now gone, thanks to the cold nights. I noted in my journal how sound was now travelling much further as the leaves fell from the forest, able to hear each train, there were not very many each day, and occasionally a distant car engine. It did not seem to deter the deer, however, who were roaring frantically, certain individuals increasingly hoarse. I could now tell each stag by his roar, and was considering naming each, perhaps using Greek gods or heroes. My first night sleeping in the shelter was not as comfortable as I would have liked, but that could be remedied with a little work, and on this day I started designing a better bed in my journal, along with an oven and raised fireplace. The heat from the fire was already being trapped and contained by the heather thatching. I had a small arm-length square to finish, but there was constant rain, and the idea of gathering soaking wet heather was not appealing. and it was noticeable how much warmer it actually was, even with the relatively large hole in the middle for the smoke and sparks to leave. When I went to collect water, I was surprised by just how much warmth the shelter had retained when I returned. It was working even better than my expectations, possibly partly due to the superb quality of the seasoned oak I was burning. Forwards Time Anniversaries. October the 15th, 2010 was another day with no photographs, although on the 16th I more than made up for this, taking 126, leaving me, future Alex, to try and pick a small selection to share with you. My journal from that day also recorded the fact I was conscious I needed to reacquire my habit of recording events and thoughts in detail rather than note form. I had been busy thatching, tidying and sorting the shelter and gathering firewood, a task which, as the old saying goes, keeps you warm 3 times. First, when collected and carried, second, when prepared, sawn and split, and finally, when burnt. It was a good thing I gathered plenty of fuel. The weather had been cold and damp all week, with rain soaking everything. In my shelter, with my layers of wool and a fire, I was warm, if not entirely dry. Whenever I went out to pee or to collect wood or water, I often came back soaked to my underwear, despite Gore-Tex on top of the woolens. Yet this was the west coast of Scotland, an area of temperate rainforest where water was life and water was everywhere, intrinsic to the landscape. The following fall, when I also spent weeks out in the woods, it was much, much wetter, raining almost non-stop for 3 weeks at one point. That was difficult, seeing no sun at all. Little Burn, a stream I would collect my water from, normally easily crossed in a big jump, became swollen and dangerous, 10 times as wide and much more fierce. Even when I was within the wood and heather walls of my shelter, the wildlife still came to visit. I have already mentioned the wood mouse, the robin and the wren, and my journal from this day records the visit of a noisy family of shrews, moving together along the base of the walls, shrieking, calling, squeaking, seemingly constantly angry with something or someone or the world in general. My camera was hung up and in its case to protect against the damp and the smoke, and I did not dare move, lest I frighten the tiny creatures. Instead, I sat still and watched as they rushed around catching spiders, crane flies, and anything else that seemed like a tasty morsel. They were enchanting little creatures, although sitting observing them showed just why they have such a reputation for ill manners. In my journal, I list messages I had received, things that were happening in the outside world, the world beyond the trees and soundtrack of roaring deer, calling little birds and crying eagles. I noted that I said my goodbyes to the woman I had been in a complicated relationship with before leaving Sheffield at her request. She mentioned waiting until I was back from the woods, waiting until Christmas and the New Year, and perhaps meeting up in Paris if we still felt the same way. We never did, but I shamelessly stole that idea and worked it into the beginning of The Town at the End of the World, the second novel in The Greater Good, still to be published, so it was not wasted. As emotional as my journal reminds me I was still happy with my choices, as I also recorded the following line. I love it here, despite it being so tough when it is cold and damp. Journal 1, 15th of October 2010. On this day, in more practical events, I levelled the area of the floor where I was now sleeping, in order to make a better bed. After, I wove a neck sheath for my main knife, as having it on my belt was proving impractical now I was wearing my longer coat most of the time, and I didn't have a second belt to place over my smock. Finally, I sharpened all my tools, something that is often neglected by those who only play at survival skills. Instead, I have known people who have bought a new knife rather than bother to learn to sharpen one, which is ridiculous. This behavior is alien to me. I have had one of my knives for nearly 40 years now. My main sheath knife, the one I use the most, an Isaki Yabenbar Puko, if you like that sort of thing, more than 25, and my usual axe approaching 20. When I was much younger, I was not allowed knives. My mum hates the things, equating them with violence, as many of the population of the UK sadly seem to do these days. I got around this by making a knife for myself, using an old Sheffield steel butter knife I found at my granny's. from where it had been lost whilst gardening. She used a couple of these knives to remove moss from a footpath. I laboriously ground this with a piece of sandstone to reshape the blade, then learnt to sharpen it, also using a piece of natural Orcadian sandstone. I proceeded to make a sheath from an old belt, and used a leather from an old moccasin slipper to make the bone handle grip thicker, learning how to wrap a handle. I still have this knife today, and it is still kept sharp, the leather well oiled from my hands. A blunt blade is a disaster waiting to happen. More force is applied than should be used for a cut, exponentially increasing the chances of slipping and cutting oneself. Sharper knives are simply safer once you know how to use one. A good sharpening session is a therapy and meditation of its own. Perhaps if children were routinely taught to appreciate a knife as a tool, learn to handle them, care for them, reshape them for their own needs, I wonder how would they view them. On this day, the 15th of October 2010, I had no idea that, 11 years later, my daughter Elsa would be born. At the time, I was trying very hard to work out who I was and what I wanted to achieve in life, and I was sure children were nowhere on that list. Now I am at the point where I'm wondering when I can make Elsa her first sheath knife, how old she should be. Soon, I think. Forward's anniversaries are strange things. Never lose sight of your vision. I started taking photographs with the dawn, a pink glow to the east, then walked and explored my way through the day until the sun set. I took photos of the view from my door, of the deer trails, and of where they fought night after night. I even took a photo of me. I ended the day as I had begun, with the sun, this time as she disappeared over the ridge to the west, dipping into the Atlantic beyond. Already a bit further south of where she had been when I first began to build my shelter. On this day, my journal records the thoughts I had been considering on the issue of compromise in our lives, how different it can be depending on the exact circumstances, how sometimes it can feel like chipping away at the soul until we feel something is missing, that there must be more to life. I ended that section of my journal with this line, a line I still very much believe in, but often have to remind myself to actually follow through. Make choices based on a bigger picture, but never lose sight of your vision. Journal 1, 16th of October 2010. Of things bitey. I snapped no photos on the 17th of October 2010, other than a series of journal pages on which I had crafted a blog for my sister's site. I would not take any more photographs until the 20th, while I worked hard on completing the shelter thatching, making it thicker and warmer. I did keep writing in my journal, and one note records that I started some Christmas presents for my family, using the wood, bone, and stone of the area in which I was living. I felt like I was settling in. The variety of insect life in this region is quite amazing, with beautiful butterflies, huge and pretty spiders, shining beetles, and many other types of scurrying, crawling, flying, or wriggling wildlife, all fed something larger. This variety was at odds with parts of the UK I knew, especially in England, where insect numbers have plummeted over recent decades to the point where it is a dire emergency, all thanks to our own destruction of the nature. There, in my small slice of temperate rainforest, I had to contend with midges, mosquitoes, the clegs, the centipedes that would clamber inside your clothes, the spiders that would do likewise, and, worst of all in my opinion, the many, many ticks, some carrying Lyme disease, hungry to suck the blood of a deer or, failing that, a tasty human. For whatever reason, perhaps my blood group AB negative, but who really knows, I am one of those people who seems to be just such a tasty example. All things bitey are attracted to me, much to my chagrin and the relief of friends and family who are duly mostly ignored. The rise in Lyme-carrying ticks in the UK is also our fault. Too many deer and a warming environment have introduced this dubious legacy. Although I loved this area, it was not simple to live within by any means, shape or form. Sometimes I worry that the photos and pieces I share do not accurately portray life out there on those slopes. There were several negative things to deal with, but for me, these were vastly outweighed by the many positives. I have, however, shared camps with others who have found the wilder parts of the world too difficult, not the same as the romantic image they had created in their head, too tough, too wet, too cold, too windy, too many midges, clegs, ticks. In all the many months I spent out there, and here's a footnote, was I actually spending time out there, or was I saving it? This is a question I often ponder. My 2010 adventure and the one the following year, along with others, I never once had a tick manage to attach itself to me. This is through knowledge, awareness, good equipment, and training myself to observe constantly. And probably a decent side helping of luck, something I'm naturally fortunate to have. To me, these things are all a part of the landscape I love, and although exceptionally irritating at times, they can be tolerated for all the other beauty that surrounds them, and they certainly underpin the food web. Winter felt like she was whispering, and the deer, voice-breaking, hoarse roar after roar, and the increasingly frantic clashing seemed to agree, their urgency raising tempo and decibels both. Of shopping lists and eagles. As I mentioned yesterday, I have no photos from either the 18th or the 19th of October 2010. My journal records the heavy storm that swept through in the night, the hailstorms that lashed my shelter during the day, with an accompanying considerable temperature drop, then the sudden, sharp and cold blue skies later. I made a new wooden spoon for stirring my billy can, as I had foolishly cracked the previous one I had carved and I left it too close to the fire. The previous one was not wasted, however, as it made a good scoop for ashes used in cooking. My Christmas presents were also progressing, with various raw materials sourced and collected and ideas sketched out in my moleskin. After talking to my sister Lydia, who is the editor, owner of Shiveriggle, the literary website where my wilderness journal blog was initially shared, I decided to write a shopping list for things I could not find locally, or certainly could not get cheaply in the local area, such as a replacement ferro rod and a planisphere, so I could study the night sky in more detail. In those days, there were no apps to help, and, even if there were, cell phone charge was a premium currency. The idea was that she parcel them up once purchased and post them to a local post office, Poste Restante. I carried my passport, so had requisite ID and could time picking up the parcel with buying extra supplies if I needed them. I could not do this in Fort William, as the clocks would soon be changing, and, coupled with shorter and darker days, this change meant I could not catch a train and get back home in the daylight. I'm not afraid of the dark, nor of the things that move around in it, but neither am I stupid. Walking back to the camp, carrying a large pack full of heavy supplies, crossing a fast-flowing burn, avoiding hidden gaps and holes around tree roots and boulders, would not be sensible. It was hard enough in full daylight. Even with my ever-present walking staff, I could not trust to the light from my head torch. This in mind, I pondered a final trip to Fort William before the clock change for enough staple foodstuffs to see me through to Christmas. The deer, who had gone strangely silent during the day, following their increase in volume, started to roar again, and I surprised a pair of hinds when I went to refill my water. Of course, since my head was full of lists, suitable websites for outdoor gear, and other things civilized, I forgot to take my camera with me when I refilled the water bags. It is interesting how even a small dose of civilization could affect my routine. Had I not forgotten the camera, I would have captured some close shots as I approached a deer from upwind, the heads down at the water, those ever-twisting ears failing to catch my approach. These missed photo opportunities, whilst mildly irritating, do not really matter. I have the memory of this meeting, and a paragraph to remind me in my journal. Similarly, there were several times I could have captured a fantastic photo of the local golden eagle, swooping and spiraling low above me, always when I was at the toilet, my camera back in the shelter. I began to suspect that the eagle hid nearby, only flying above me when it knew I was answering the call of nature, some sort of avian, aquiline drawing. Watching it being mobbed by the local three buzzards was spectacular, and would have made an amazing photo, perfectly demonstrating just how much bigger the eagle is than the buzzard, which is commonly mistaken for an eagle by tourists in Scotland. When the local crows joined in, this would have been even better for a size comparison. All the time I looked up from burning my toilet paper and saw it carrying a whole deer leg away, wings beating to carry it higher and higher, eventually disappearing into the east. In some ways, these memories are even more precious than those I managed to capture on an SD card. Their image is burned within my head and will never diminish, especially when coupled with the words in my journal. I still remember literally gasping at that sight and the fizz and buzz of adrenaline which followed, breath catching in my throat and eyes wide. This physical reaction, entwined with the mental and emotional, left the memory one I will treasure and, hopefully, retain for years to come. I often thought back to the very first day of this adventure, to what that old man on the last train of my journey had told me. What you are doing is banking for the future, and how utterly right he was. What about you? Do you love to take photographs of natural phenomena, whether sunrise or sunset, moon shadow, rainbow, storm or snow, or any other marvel we live amongst? Do you hear deer roaring where you live, or bugling if you're in Wapiti country, or any of the other ridiculous varied seasonal cervid noises? Do you have a fire or stove in your home, and how does burning wood for fuel make you feel? And have you noticed an increase in ticks where you live? Finally, to read the introduction to my autumnal 2010 adventure, click here. To go back to week 4, click here. I hope you're enjoying reading this revisited journey as much as I enjoy sharing it. If you have liked it, please share with anyone else you think may enjoy the adventure. I truly appreciate every share, like and comment. I will reply to everyone who leaves a message. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than others. Finally, if you do find value in reading or listening to my words and wish to support me financially, but do not want to take out a subscription to my letter, you could also send a one-off tip via this button, and a huge thank you to those of you who have done so. I greatly appreciate that. Thanks for listening.